The Jackson Heights Police Department had long prided itself on being a paragon of justice and integrity, a beacon of law and order in a bustling city. Its officers were seen as the guardians of the community, upholding the ideals of fairness and protection. Yet, behind the polished veneer of their public image, the department's foundation was beginning to show unsettling cracks. It was within this charged atmosphere that Angela Davis, a poised and self-assured black woman, found herself navigating the city's vibrant streets in a sleek, high-end luxury car. Angela's daily routine was far from ordinary. She was not just another resident of Jackson Heights, but an undercover agent working for internal affairs. Her mission was to delve into the very heart of the corruption and misconduct that seemed to seep through the ranks of the police department. Little did she know that this seemingly mundane drive through the city would soon thrust her into a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences. On this particular day, Officer Kevin Myers was patrolling the well-to-do streets of Jackson Heights. Known for his brash demeanor and rigid adherence to his sense of authority, Myers had built a reputation for his unyielding approach to law enforcement. As he cruised through the area in his patrol car, his posture was one of arrogance and self-importance. The uniform he wore was more than just a badge of duty. It was a symbol of the power and control he relished. With the confidence that came from years of commanding respect, Myers scanned the streets not for genuine criminal activity, but for anything or anyone that seemed out of place. It was in this mindset that he noticed a sleek black luxury sedan moving with a speed that struck him as too fast for his liking. The car, gliding through the neighborhood, was driven by a woman who radiated an air of calm sophistication. She was a black woman dressed in elegant attire, her very presence standing in stark contrast to the environment Myers was accustomed to scrutinizing. Intrigued and fueled by his own biases, Myers' eyes lingered on her longer than was warranted. A seed of suspicion took root in his mind, his thoughts clouded by preconceived notions. What's she doing here, he mused, the question tainted by his prejudices. Without further deliberation, he flicked on his patrol car's lights and signaled for the luxury sedan to pull over. Angela, fully aware of the potential for escalation, responded with remarkable composure. She maneuvered her vehicle to the side of the road with practiced ease. Her demeanor remained calm and collected, a reflection of her extensive training. As she rolled down her window, she could see Officer Myers approaching with a rigid stance, his hand resting on his belt in a gesture that conveyed both authority and aggression. Angela observed the way he knocked on her window with an exaggerated force, a clear sign of his impatience and underlying hostility. "License and registration," Myers barked, his tone dripping with an air of superiority and entitlement. There was no trace of the politeness or professional courtesy one might expect. Angela's face remained a mask of serene neutrality as she reached into her purse to retrieve the necessary documents. She was acutely aware of the scrutiny she was under, every movement being watched with a suspicious eye. As she handed over her papers, her mind was already analyzing the situation, prepared for the encounter's potential outcomes. Angela's training had equipped her to handle precisely these kinds of scenarios, encounters where her calm demeanor was essential, where every detail mattered. She knew this was more than a simple traffic stop. It was a pivotal moment that could expose the prejudices lurking within the department and possibly unravel Officer Myers' career. The stakes were high, and as the interaction unfolded, both Angela and Myers would be thrust into a confrontation that could alter their lives in ways neither of them could fully anticipate. Kevin flipped through the stack of documents with a crooked smile slowly spreading across his face, as if he was savoring the anticipation of discovering some discrepancy. His eyes darted from one page to the next, searching for any hint of irregularity. But when he found nothing amiss, his irritation simmered just beneath the surface. He looked up at Angela with a condescending smirk, the kind that suggested he was about to unleash a well-practiced insult. "Nice car," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You sure it's yours?" His tone carried an unmistakable insinuation, as if he were questioning not just the ownership of the vehicle, but her right to be driving it at all. Angela's gaze remained steady and unflinching, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his pretense. "Yes," she replied succinctly. "It's mine." Kevin's smirk faltered, a crack appearing in his carefully maintained facade. This was not the reaction he was accustomed to. Most people, especially women, would have started to show signs of nervousness by now. They would stumble over their words, offer hasty explanations, or scramble to justify themselves. But Angela was different. Her unwavering calmness seemed to rattle him, unsettling his expectations. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Determined to regain control, Kevin leaned in closer to the open window, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "Where'd you get the money for something like this?" he demanded, his voice laced with thinly veiled contempt. "Doesn't seem like you belong in this part of town." If you ask me, the insinuation was clear. He was questioning not just her car, but her very right to be there. Angela remained unmoved, her demeanor as composed as ever. She had dealt with his type before, and was well aware of the game he was playing. "I wasn't aware I needed your approval to drive through here," she replied evenly, her voice unwavering. Inside, she meticulously noted every word, every inflection of his tone. This was part of her job, after all. Kevin's frustration mounted. The control he sought to impose was slipping away, and it showed in the way his jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. In a last-ditch effort to assert dominance, Kevin leaned even closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "People like you don't usually drive cars like this," he said, his eyes narrowing further. "You got something you want to tell me?" His gaze was intense, searching for any sign of weakness. Angela chose to remain silent, fully aware that any response could escalate the situation further. Instead, she held her ground, her gaze never wavering. Inside, Kevin was beginning to feel the weight of his frustration. He was accustomed to compliance, to seeing fear in people's eyes, but Angela's calm and unyielding demeanor was something he wasn't prepared for. It was as if she was operating on a different level, one he couldn't quite grasp. "Step out of the car," Kevin ordered abruptly, stepping back with an air of forced authority. Angela hesitated, but not out of fear. Her pause was strategic, a moment to assess her next move. She had no intention of escalating the situation, but recognized that this was the moment she had been preparing for. Slowly, she opened the door and stepped out of the vehicle, standing tall and composed, her eyes fixed on Kevin with unwavering resolve. Kevin's frustration surged. He had expected her to be intimidated, to falter, but she remained unmoved. The shift in power dynamics was palpable, and it fueled his anger. He began to circle her car, inspecting it with a scrutinizing gaze as though hoping to find anything that could justify his authority. But the car was immaculate, the documents were in order, and Angela's demeanor offered him no leverage. "Do you live around here?" Kevin's voice was sharp, his tone almost accusatory. "I do," Angela responded calmly, gesturing down the street. Just a few blocks away. Kevin's jaw clenched tightly. Despite his skepticism, there was nothing he could do. Angela exuded a confidence that rattled him deeply. She was not scared, not nervous, and worst of all, she was providing him with no reason to continue the stop. "Maybe I should call this in," Kevin muttered, his hand hovering over the radio clip to his belt. Though his tone suggested he might report the situation, his true intention was far from genuine. He was hoping to provoke a reaction from Angela, to test her resolve. Angela, arms crossed and eyes piercing, was growing impatient. She understood this was the pivotal moment when Kevin would either escalate his aggression or retreat. "Go ahead," she said, her voice unwavering and calm. "Call it," and Kevin paused, momentarily disoriented by her unflinching composure. Her confidence was unsettling, and a nagging voice in the back of his mind warned that he was on the brink of making a critical error. Yet, his pride and stubbornness refused to let him back down. He couldn't allow himself to be outmaneuvered. With a brusque movement, Kevin withdrew his hand from the radio and turned his back to Angela, heading toward his patrol car. The encounter was slipping from his control, and he was powerless to reverse it. Angela observed him closely, her face a mask of calm detachment, though she was fully aware of the implications of this moment. As Kevin retreated, he felt an unsettling sense of disquiet, unaware that Angela was not just any motorist, but an undercover internal affairs agent meticulously documenting his every move and utterance. Sliding back into her vehicle, Angela maintained her outward serenity, but internally she was acutely aware that this was only the beginning of a much larger operation. Kevin Myers was about to face the repercussions of his misconduct, and evasion was no longer an option. Meanwhile, Kevin lingered by his patrol car, scrutinizing Angela's paperwork with a scowl, as though searching for any minor infraction that might justify his hostility. The documents, her license, registration, and proof of insurance were all perfectly in order. Yet Kevin was determined not to let her go without further confrontation. His frustration mounted as Angela remained unfazed and unflinching. Her composure seemed to provoke him further. "You must be hiding something," he said, his voice laced with derision. "People like you driving cars like this in neighborhoods, it doesn't add up. So what's the story? Drugs? Fraud? What's going on here?" Angela's face remained a picture of calm, her breathing even. She had navigated such scenarios before, But today was different. Today, every action Kevin took was feeding directly into her carefully orchestrated investigation. While Kevin continued his verbal assault, Angela's mind was sharply focused on documenting his behavior, his tone, his posture, his underlying racism. All of it was part of a recognizable pattern of misconduct she had encountered in officers like him. Unbeknownst to Kevin, Angela's mission was far from ordinary. For months, she had been undercover, investigating serious allegations of misconduct and abuse of power within the Jackson Heights Police Department. The department had recently come under intense scrutiny due to numerous complaints about officers engaging in racial profiling, excessive force, and intimidation. Kevin Myers had emerged as a key figure in these allegations. Known for his harassment of citizens, particularly people of color, Kevin used his badge as a shield to perpetuate his unacceptable behavior. Angela had been meticulously collecting evidence, operating from the shadows. She had already assembled a compelling case against several officers, but Kevin was one of her primary targets. This traffic stop was not merely a routine encounter, it was a strategic opportunity to expose his true nature. Kevin, entirely unaware of the looming repercussions, chose to escalate the confrontation further. He approached Angela's vehicle, leaning in with a menacing air, his voice a low growl filled with malice. "You know, I could make this a lot easier for you. Just confess what you're hiding, and maybe we can avoid turning this into a bigger issue than it needs to be." Angela's silence was her most potent weapon. She recognized his attempt to provoke a reaction, to elicit a mistake or a loss of composure, but she was resolute. She would not give him the satisfaction of a response. Instead, she allowed him to continue digging his own grave. Each of his words, every hostile gesture was meticulously recorded, becoming another incriminating piece in the comprehensive case she was building against him. Kevin's irritation grew more palpable as he observed Angela's unwavering calm. He yanked his radio from his belt and with an audible click, keyed the microphone. "Let's get some backup down here," he announced, his voice deliberately loud to ensure Angela could hear every word. He aimed to humiliate her, to force her into a corner by creating a scene. He hoped that with more officers on the scene, she might crumble under the mounting pressure. Yet, Angela remained unfazed. She understood that Kevin's tactics would only backfire. The more he escalated the situation, the more witnesses there would be, and the more undeniable his actions would become. As Kevin waited for additional officers to arrive, Angela's mind wandered back to the broader context of the case she was working on. This confrontation was not merely about Kevin. He was a symptom of a deeper, systemic issue, a culture of corruption deeply entrenched within the department. Officers like Kevin had come to operate with a disturbing sense of impunity, their misconduct shielded by an insidious code of silence among their colleagues. Angela had been methodically compiling evidence, interviewing victims, and assembling a damning array of reports that exposed the systemic flaws. Kevin was a significant piece of the puzzle, but her mission extended far beyond his actions. Her goal was to dismantle the corrupt framework that allowed such abuses to persist and to hold those in positions of power accountable for their misdeeds. Angela had witnessed far too many cases where officers like Kevin managed to evade justice, their abuses overlooked or excused. Her determination to end this cycle of impunity fueled her resolve. This stop was not solely about confronting Kevin. It was about representing every person who had been wronged, every individual whose life had been disrupted by someone who thought their badge made them invincible. Kevin's continued muttering and pacing around the car, his frustration evident in every step, only reinforced Angela's commitment. His anger was a sign of his frustration that she wasn't succumbing to his attempts to undermine her. As the minutes dragged on, Angela remained composed, her demeanor a stark contrast to Kevin's mounting agitation. She knew that the arrival of backup would mean even more scrutiny of Kevin's actions. His ego would likely prevent him from backing down, and his attempts to assert control would only deepen the hole he was digging for himself. Angela observed the tension in Kevin's body language, the clenched jaw, the tight fists as signs of his discomfort with being challenged. His instinctual need to dominate clashed with her strategic calm, and that was his critical error. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that Apple. Thank you for your valuable time. In the quiet intervals between his outbursts, Angela reflected on the systemic failure she was confronting. She thought of all the individuals who had lodged complaints, who had faced harassment, intimidation, or worse at the hands of officers like Kevin. The system had failed them time and time again, and today represented a crucial step towards rectifying those wrongs. Kevin was still oblivious to the fact that his time was running out. Angela was not merely gathering evidence from this interaction. She had accumulated weeks of meticulous documentation, witness statements, and recordings. Kevin's arrogance was about to collide with the full force of the evidence she had meticulously gathered. And when that reckoning arrived, there would be no escaping the consequences of his actions. As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, Angela Davis remained a portrait of unshakable calm. She had executed her part in this encounter with precision. And now it was only a matter of time before the repercussions would bring Officer Kevin Meyer's arrogance crashing down. While he might have believed he still held the reins of authority, the reality was about to shift dramatically. Kevin stood tall, exuding confidence as he anticipated the arrival of backup. The sirens meant reinforcement, and with it, he expected a bolstering of his power and pressure on Angela. In his mind, the arrival of additional officers would cement his control over the situation, turning it to his advantage. However, as the other patrol cars rolled up and their lights flashed, Kevin immediately sensed something was amiss. The usual camaraderie, the casual nods and friendly banter were conspicuously absent. Instead, the other officers' glances were brief, their expressions notably reserved and distant. Angela, poised and unflinching, watched as the officers disembarked from their vehicles. Kevin, brimming with misplaced confidence, turned to them, expecting the usual reinforcement. But their silence was palpable, creating an unsettling atmosphere. The support he was counting on didn't materialize, and a creeping unease began to erode his sense of control. The routine he had relied on for so long seemed to unravel before his eyes. Breaking the silence, Angela's voice was steady and composed. "My name is Angela Davis," she said, her tone clear and authoritative as she produced a small badge from her jacket. "I'm with Internal Affairs." The declaration seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implications. For Kevin, those words were a seismic shock, a realization that he was no longer dealing with a mere civilian, but with an investigator tasked with scrutinizing the very behaviors he had taken for granted. The atmosphere shifted palpably as Kevin absorbed the gravity of Angela's revelation. His heart raced, a mix of shock and dread settling in. Angela wasn't someone he could intimidate or dismiss. She was precisely the person responsible for holding officers like him accountable. His mind raced with the implications of her presence. The realization dawned on him that Angela had been observing every action, every inflection, and every attempt to assert dominance. As Kevin scanned the faces of his fellow officers, he noticed their expressions had shifted. They no longer appeared to be allies, but were instead passive observers, perhaps even awaiting further instructions from Angela. This shift in allegiance made him acutely aware of how the balance of power had tipped away from him. His carefully crafted control over the situation was disintegrating, replaced by an unsettling sense of vulnerability. Angela turned her gaze back to Kevin, her eyes unwavering. "Everything you've said and done during this stop has been recorded," she stated calmly. "You are under investigation for misconduct, and this incident will be a critical part of the report." Kevin's breath momentarily caught in his throat. A surge of panic surged through him as he grappled with the reality of the situation. Denial seemed futile. Angela's composed demeanor and the gravity of her words indicated that she was not bluffing. The recorded evidence would reveal his arrogance, his condescending remarks, and his attempts to intimidate Angela without just cause. There was no escape from the damning evidence that had been meticulously collected. Despite his efforts to maintain composure, Kevin felt the sting of panic. He stammered defensively, "I didn't do anything wrong," but the feeble protest rang hollow even to his ears. The flimsy justification of a routine stop seemed pathetically inadequate in light of the serious allegations now confronting him. Angela remained unflinching, her response delivered with unwavering clarity. "You had no legitimate reason to stop me," she said. "Your behavior was unprofessional, your remarks were racially charged, and you attempted to intimidate me without cause. All of this is documented." The weight of her words and the reality of the situation began to sink in. Kevin was left grappling with the stark realization that his actions had been both recorded and judged. The once familiar confidence he derived from his uniform and badge had been replaced by the uncomfortable reality of accountability. Kevin's mouth went dry, his throat constricting as if he were choking on the weight of the situation. His mind raced frantically, grasping for anything that could salvage his crumbling position. He had always been adept at talking his way out of tight spots, skillfully twisting situations to his advantage. But this time he knew there was no escaping it. The line had been crossed, and there was no retreat. Angela closed the distance between them, her voice unwavering and authoritative. "You've been under investigation for some time now, Officer Myers. This isn't the first time we've received complaints about your behavior, but it will be the last." Her words sliced through the air with surgical precision. Kevin's pulse raced, his heart hammering in his chest as the gravity of her statement sank in. He had always harbored a nagging awareness that his conduct was questionable, that he had pushed boundaries and crossed lines far too often, but he had never imagined it would culminate like this. The realization that someone like Angela, a figure he had underestimated, would be the one to bring him down was a crushing blow. The other officer stood back, silent and observant. Kevin's gut churned with the realization that they were not here to support him. They had likely been briefed beforehand, prepared to witness his downfall rather than offer any assistance. The weight of this realization was like a physical blow, striking him deep in the stomach. Angela continued, her tone resolute. "This incident, along with several others, will be reviewed thoroughly. Your actions today have only served to confirm our suspicions. You've abused your power, and now the consequences are unavoidable." Kevin's mind reeled in disbelief. What was supposed to be a routine stop, a typical day in his line of work, had turned into a stark confrontation with his professional demise. His career hung precariously in the balance, and he was left grappling with the stark reality that he had no one to blame but himself. "You don't understand," Kevin protested, his voice betraying a tremor of desperation. "I was just doing my job." Angela's expression remained unchanged, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Your job is to serve and protect," she replied firmly. "It is not to harass and intimidate. You've lost sight of that fundamental principle, Officer Myers, and now you're going to face the repercussions." The weight of her words settled on Kevin like an oppressive force, a heavy burden that seemed to crush him from all sides. There was no escaping the truth, no more excuses, no more bending the rules to fit his needs. This was the end of the line, and he could see no way out. He glanced at the other officers one last time, hoping for a glimmer of support or solidarity, but their stony silence confirmed his worst fears. They were mere spectators in his downfall, and their presence offered no solace. Angela took a deliberate step back, her posture as commanding as ever. "You will be receiving an official notice of your suspension," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "There will be a full investigation into your conduct. I suggest you cooperate fully. Officer Myers, it's your only viable option." Kevin stood there, rendered speechless, as the enormity of his situation crashed down upon him. Angela had dismantled his world with chilling efficiency, leaving him to grapple with the disintegration of his power and authority. Everything he had relied upon, the respect, the control, the fear he instilled in others, was collapsing around him. Angela made no move to wait for a response. Her message was delivered with finality. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted, and Kevin was left amidst the ruins of his own making, utterly powerless to stop the unfolding wreckage. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Kevin walked into the station, the burden of his impending downfall heavy on his shoulders. The usual hum of conversation that greeted him every morning was now replaced by an unsettling silence. His colleagues, who normally exchanged friendly banter, now averted their gazes as he passed. The few who did acknowledge him offered curt nods, their expressions a mix of pity and wariness. It was as if an unspoken consensus had formed, recognizing the storm that was about to hit, but not wanting to be entangled in it. The atmosphere was thick with an invisible tension, a stark contrast to the camaraderie that usually pervaded the station. Kevin struggled to maintain his usual facade of control, but with each step, the pressure mounted. The realization that his long-standing pattern of evading consequences had finally caught up with him was an uncomfortable truth. His mind raced, plagued by the fear of losing everything he had built his career on. He had always prided himself on his ability to assert dominance and control situations, but today's events had starkly highlighted the fragility of his power. Angela's calm yet forceful dismantling of his authority had left him feeling exposed and vulnerable, the looming threat of an internal affairs investigation gnawing at his every thought. Despite the numerous complaints that had circulated about him, Kevin had always managed to evade full accountability until now. The weight of Angela's scrutiny and the very real possibility of an investigation forced him to confront the stark reality. There was no place to hide this time. As Kevin grappled with his spiraling world, Angela's work was far from over. She wasted no time in intensifying her investigation, fueled by the recent incident. The encounter with Kevin had provided a critical piece of evidence, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. Angela had been meticulously gathering evidence for weeks, and this latest development only underscored the gravity of the situation. The more she delved into the complaints and reports, the clearer it became that Kevin was not an isolated problem. There was a disturbing pattern of abuse, racial profiling, harassment, and misuse of authority that implicated more than just him. Angela's investigation quickly expanded beyond Kevin. As she reviewed the multitude of complaints, it became apparent that systemic issues were deeply entrenched within the department. Other officers were implicated, either through their direct involvement in misconduct or by their deliberate blindness to the rampant corruption. The depth of the problem was staggering, and it was clear that addressing it would require more than just taking down one rogue officer. Determined to uncover the full extent of the corruption, Angela began reaching out to officers who had grown disillusioned with the department's toxic environment. These were individuals who had privately questioned Kevin's tactics but had been too intimidated to speak out. Their testimonies provided invaluable insights and confirmed Angela's suspicions. Kevin was not operating in isolation. There was an entrenched network of officers who wielded their power to intimidate and control, and this network had been allowed to fester unchecked for years. As Angela pushed forward with her investigation, the department grew increasingly polarized. Support for her efforts came from those who were desperate for reform and weary of the shadow cast by officers like Kevin. They saw Angela's actions as a necessary step toward cleaning up the force and restoring justice. However, there was also significant resistance. Many officers loyal to Kevin or fearful of the repercussions viewed Angela as an unwelcome intrusion. Some saw internal affairs intervention as an overreach, while others worried that the scrutiny could expose their questionable actions. The tension within the department was palpable, creating a climate of distrust and division that only complicated the path to justice. As the tension at the station simmered, anticipation hung in the air despite the internal divisions. Angela, undeterred, called a crucial meeting with her team to address the broader issues at play. The situation had evolved beyond Kevin. It was now a matter of tackling a pervasive culture of abuse within the department. Angela methodically laid out her findings, drawing connections between Kevin's misconduct and the officers who either enabled or ignored his behavior. The meeting was charged with intensity as Angela and her team reviewed a mounting dossier of evidence pointing to systemic corruption. It became glaringly evident that Kevin's case was merely the tip of the iceberg. Angela's resolve to peel back every layer of wrongdoing grew stronger. Her objective was clear: to expose not just Kevin, but the entrenched network of corruption that had allowed such abuses to persist unchecked. Meanwhile, back at the station, Kevin received the official notification of his inquiry. His pulse quickened as he read the document informing him of a formal investigation into his conduct. The reality of the situation hit him like a sledgehammer. Kevin, who had previously evaded consequences, now faced the undeniable weight of overwhelming evidence. The walls were closing in, and the sense of invincibility he once relied upon was crumbling. Entering the inquiry room, Kevin was met by a panel consisting of both officers and internal affairs representatives. Angela was present, observing the proceedings with a calm yet resolute demeanor. As Kevin tried to cling to his former arrogance, it became increasingly apparent that his defenses were faltering. He attempted to justify his actions by asserting that he had been adhering to protocol and performing his duties as required. Yet every claim he made was systematically dismantled by a barrage of cold, hard evidence. Witnesses had come forward, recorded complaints were scrutinized, and Angela's comprehensive documentation of Kevin's abuses presented a damning narrative that left little room for doubt. The inquiry dragged on, with Kevin's desperation mounting as the evidence continued to stack up against him. He floundered, trying to deflect blame by suggesting that the complaints were exaggerated or misinterpreted. But it was evident to everyone in the room that Kevin's transgressions extended far beyond any plausible misunderstanding. Angela watched as Kevin's once unshakable arrogance disintegrated into a desperate scramble to salvage what remained of his career. His attempts to defend himself were met with undeniable facts, and the weight of his impending downfall became increasingly apparent. The inquiry concluded with a heavy silence. Kevin was instructed to leave the room while the panel deliberated, and the door closed behind him with a sense of finality that left him hollow. Outside, Kevin grappled with the harsh reality of his situation. His belief in his invulnerability was shattered as he faced the tangible consequences of his actions, consequences he had never truly anticipated. Meanwhile, Angela remained inside, engaged in discussions with her team about the next steps. The success in bringing Kevin to justice was significant, but Angela knew the work was far from over. The investigation into the department's systemic corruption was only just beginning, and she was prepared to see it through. Kevin's downfall was a critical piece of the puzzle, But Angela understood that to cleanse the department, they needed to press on. They had to expose every officer who had abused their power and rebuild the shattered trust within the community. When Kevin was eventually called back into the room, the panel's decision was swift and decisive. He was suspended pending further investigation, with a strong likelihood of termination. The inquiry had made it clear that his tenure as a police officer was effectively over. As Kevin left the station, the weight of his losses settled in. For Angela, it marked a small victory in a much larger and ongoing battle. She recognized that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but her determination was unwavering. The corruption that had long plagued the department would not vanish overnight, but each step forward brought her closer to restoring accountability and justice to the force. The investigation into Kevin's conduct unfolded with an unexpected swiftness, catching him entirely off guard. The evidence amassed against him was not only overwhelming but also meticulously compiled, presenting a damning case that left little room for doubt. Angela, who had devoted countless hours to gathering and organizing the evidence, stood poised and resolute. She unveiled a comprehensive array of materials, including detailed recordings of their encounters, a troubling pattern of complaints from both fellow officers and citizens, and poignant testimonies from individuals who had suffered under Kevin's watchful eye. Each piece of evidence served as a heavy blow to Kevin's career, effectively hammering nails into the coffin of his once proud professional life. There was no space for denial or excuses. The truth of his actions was laid bare for all to see. As Angela methodically presented her case, the atmosphere in the room was charged with tension. Her voice, calm yet authoritative, delineated the systematic abuses Kevin had engaged in. She painted a picture of misconduct that was not merely a series of isolated incidents, but indicative of a pervasive issue within the department. Angela had done her homework with painstaking precision, and every fact she laid out was bolstered by irrefutable proof. While she did not shy away from mentioning other officers who had either covered for Kevin or turned a blind eye, the focus remained firmly on him. The scrutiny was intense, and the weight of the evidence was crushing. Kevin, once a figure of arrogance and self-assuredness, now sat in stark silence. The evidence that Angela presented was like a relentless tide, eroding his composure and leaving him with nothing but a blank, stunned expression. His badge, which had once been a symbol of his authority and pride, now felt like a burden, a stark reminder of the power he had abused. As the panel delivered their decision, it came as no surprise to him, though it was no less devastating. His badge was stripped away, the emblem of his authority now a relic of a tarnished career. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. With the conclusion of the inquiry, Kevin's fate was sealed. He faced not just an indefinite suspension, but also potential legal charges for his misconduct and abuse of power. His life, meticulously built over years of service, seemed to disintegrate before him. The identity he had wrapped around his position as a police officer was reduced to ashes. Kevin had harbored a belief that he was above the law, that the system would always protect him as it had in the past. But Angela's thorough and unyielding investigation had exposed the flaws in that belief, leaving him with no escape from the consequences of his actions. As Kevin exited the inquiry, his world in tatters, Angela remained composed. She took a moment to reflect on the long and arduous journey that had brought her to this point. Kevin was merely one officer in a much larger web of corruption and abuse. The battle was far from over. Exposing Kevin was just the beginning. Angela knew that there were more like him officers who had operated with impunity for far too long. Her efforts had only scratched the surface of the deep-rooted problems within the department. Angela's superiors recognized the significance of her accomplishments. They praised her for her dedication and the meticulousness with which she had brought down an officer who had seemed untouchable for years. Her efforts were seen as a crucial step toward restoring faith in the department. However, they also cautioned her about the challenges that lay ahead. The system was still fragile, and meaningful change would not come easily. There would be resistance from within the department, particularly from those uncomfortable with the level of accountability she was demanding. It was clear that the path to reform would be a protracted and contentious battle. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Angela prepared herself for the arduous road ahead. Her mission extended beyond Kevin. It was about dismantling a culture that had allowed officers like him to thrive unchecked. She anticipated significant pushback but was resolute in her commitment to reform. Having witnessed firsthand the damage caused by unchecked authority, Angela was determined to continue her fight for justice. As she looked toward her next assignment, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. The job of holding those in power accountable was never easy, but it was crucial. Each challenge she faced, each officer she held accountable, was a step toward restoring integrity and trust within the force. Kevin's downfall was a powerful reminder of the consequences of unrestrained authority, but also a call to action. Angela's work highlighted the importance of ensuring that the badge was a symbol of integrity and not a shield for wrongdoing. The fight was far from over, but Angela was prepared to continue her efforts. She understood that dismantling corruption required perseverance and an unwavering commitment to justice. Each victory, no matter how small, was a step toward creating lasting change. Angela's mission was not just about bringing down one corrupt officer, it was about fostering a culture of accountability and responsibility within the department. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but Angela was ready to face it with determination and resolve. Her work was far from finished, but with each step forward, she moved closer to achieving justice and reform. As we wrap up today's intense and revealing encounter between Angela Davis and Officer Kevin Myers, it's clear that the pursuit of justice is a complex and courageous endeavor. From Angela's poised defiance to Kevin's unraveling authority, this confrontation underscores the importance of integrity and accountability in law enforcement. So what have you learned from this powerful narrative? How does this story inspire you to act with courage and uphold justice in your own life? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below sharing one key lesson you've taken away from this video and how you plan to apply it in your daily life. If you found this video compelling, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insightful content. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that challenge and inspire.